I'll go ahead and say welcome to everyone here. My name is Christy Roschke. I'm the Managing Director of the News Collab at Arizona State, and also one of the course instructors for the Media Active Media Literacy course. And I'm going to go quickly through and introduce the rest of the News Collab team that are somewhere in this picture. So the co-founder of News Collab is at the bottom of my screen, Dan Gilmore. And then we have Celeste Sepsi, who is our editor and project manager. And then we have our communication assistant, Quinlan Shaughnessy. And we've all been part of the course team since August, really. We've done the course 3 times now. So again, we're really glad to have you all here. And we're very, very glad to have our special guests here today from Spaceship Media. I think this is going to be a really wonderful conversation. And that's actually one thing I forgot to say, which is we will use the chat as we have in previous conversations. So if you have questions for anyone on the team, please feel free to use the chat. And we'll be kind of taking a look at it, and we'll interject your questions throughout the conversation. And because this is a conversation about how to have civil conversation, want to give that reminder that we want to keep our comments and questions civil and, you know, in the vein of fostering kind conversation. And so with that, I'll go ahead and introduce the Spaceship Media team. So we have Eve Perlman, who is the co-founder of Spaceship. And Eve, are you going to talk now, or do you want me to introduce everyone first?
Why don't we mention everyone, and then I'll talk a little, and then we'll hear from
That sounds perfect. And then we're also joined by Adriana Garcia, who is the Director of Innovation, Erica Anderson, who is the project manager for Spaceship. And then we have Kaylee LaPera and Maya LaPearl, who are moderators. And if you've been part of our Facebook group, Help Is This True?, then you've probably seen or interacted with actually all of the Spaceship folks, but Kaylee, Maya, and Erica especially have been really active in the group. So I will go ahead and again just say it's just a great privilege and honor to have you all here. Thanks for agreeing to do this. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to Eve.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having us and hosting us. Again, my name is Eve Perlman. I'm the co-founder of Spaceship Media. We're going to talk today a little bit about Spaceship Media, how we came to be, what we do, and then Adriana is going to talk about some of the key things that we've learned to support respectful dialogue across difference. But the real meat of our time together will be a chance to talk in the way that we do now on the internet. So we welcome your comments and thoughts in the chat. We'll work together to surface those, but invite you all to just really lead with curiosity and be a part of making this a useful time for you. To get us started, I see some of you have already chatted in where you are, but I wanted to start with a little question to get us sort of in a frame of mind. I wanted to ask, what topic or topics is hardest for you to talk openly about? So what topic or topic is hard for you to talk openly about? And then the kicker is why. So I'll start. For me, I notice it's hardest for me to talk about things that I've recently learned a lot about. So something where I've like got new mastery, and I think I'm a little bit all that. And I haven't really had enough time to build expertise to know what I don't know and to be open to sort of deepening my knowledge. And so I notice that's where I get a little defensive and a little cringy. So that's something I'm working on for sure. I'm gonna ask Adriana, who I can't see in this grid, but Adriana, can you talk a little bit about a topic that's hardest for you to talk about? And then I invite everyone else to please add to the chat, and I hope you all have access to that. What is it difficult for you to talk about, and why?
So for me, it's definitely immigration. I am a first-generation U.S.-born person. Both my parents immigrated here, and I find that I'm just too close to the topic to look at it objectively. And if I'm in a conversation that is about immigration, I find that being open about my challenge, talking about it objectively, is what is most helpful to me. Just kind of setting the stage with like, hey man, this is hard. I find that doing that with intention is making it easier. Yeah, that's mine.
Thank you, Adriana. I appreciate that. And I love seeing a list of topics come through in the chat. So a little bit about me. I'm a journalist. I come to this bridging work as a journalist. I worked in local news most of my career, in a town of about 70,000 called Alameda in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I really enjoyed that service, being a reporter, a blogger, and I was always really thoughtful of my connection to the community and how to hold and support my community. In the run up to the 2016 election, I started thinking really deeply about how some of journalism's standard practices are at odds with building healthy communities and at odds with supporting a functioning democracy. So I started thinking about the way we frame stories, point, counterpoint, that can have a polarizing rather than inviting nuance effect. I started thinking about how we're drawn to extremes, right? There's an adage in journalism, if it bleeds, it leads, and how amplifying those outlier cases and those sort of extreme experiences undermine civil society and civic discourse. So with Spaceship, my co-founder and I created a methodology, what we now call dialogue journalism, this process for convening conversation across differences, really reconceptualizing journalistic process and putting communities, specifically divided communities, at the heart of our work, and then supporting those communities with moderation and reporting, and how that can build and create nuanced, respectful conversation, which is something that we can all agree we are struggling with as a society right now. We've been fortunate enough at Spaceship to work with, in partnership with major news organizations across the country about to host conversations about some of our most divisive issues. You guys all know what those are. I can name them and you know them. And you can read more about our work on our site, so you can see some of the content that's come out of these projects. And we also have a big toolkit. It's an 80-page toolkit that really maps from the beginning to end how this process works. And that's all there for you to look at and engage with. Some people look at it wholesale. You might want to look at it for just tips on conversation, the subject of this workshop today. We also, and I'm excited to say, have a book that maps the whole arc of one of our projects. And this is a project we did in 2018 after the Parkland shooting. It's about guns and gun safety. We had 130 Americans from around the country talking about their beliefs and ideas. It was rich and powerful and difficult. I'm proud of this work that really describes that process. So that's there for you too, if you're interested in learning about the whole, kind of our whole approach to these things. Today, though, we're really going to talk about dialogue, right? And the civil conversation that we need for a functioning society. And I know it's hard, and I know that we can be burnt out and angry and frightened and frustrated, but all those things just don't serve us as we go to try to have meaningful conversation across difference. And before I pass this over to Adriana to highlight some of the key things that we keep returning to as a practice as we work to support other people in difficult conversations and support ourselves. I just want to remind us that we have it in our heads a lot of times that if we just give people the right facts or the right information, that it'll change their minds, right? Like if I just send you this article, or if I just give you this statistic, or if I just show you this, it'll change your mind. And on, a fact of life is that facts don't change minds, and the research shows this, that you can show people information that contradicts a strongly held belief, and it will actually make that belief stronger. And I think our own experience, I can't imagine there's anyone here today that hasn't had the experience of being like, can't you just see that this is wrong, that what you believe is wrong, and it doesn't work. And so one of the things I think a lot about doing is if you're doing something that's not working, best to try to do it differently. And I'm not the first person to have that idea, but I think of a lot in the context of journalistic practice, right? Like if it's not working, we'll just barrage someone with information. What can I do differently? We also, another thing that I always find interesting is that we know in our personal lives that being mean to someone and insulting them and shaming them and calling them stupid doesn't get us what we want. Like we wouldn't go into a work meeting and be like, you're all idiots, do it my way, right? We would work to build the relationships, to show where we come from, to explain why it's important, and to advance our view. And we do that in our relationships, and we do that in our communities. And yet somehow we get into political settings and we think, if I just tell them they're an idiot, then they'll, that'll serve me. And so I want to have you have those two big ideas as you listen to what Adriana is going to present about how we've distilled how to make civil conversation a real practice. So Adriana, I'm super lucky to work with her. She is a journalist also. She spent her 15 years or so at the Times-Picayune in New Orleans. She was part of the Pulitzer Prize winning team after the coverage of Katrina. She came to us after a Stanford Knight Fellowship in 2016, 2017. So she's been with the team since 2018. And she spends a whole lot of time helping people talk thoughtfully about really important issues. So I'll let her take it away.
Hi, everyone. I am all of those things that Eve said. My name is Adriana Garcia, and I do a lot of this for work, think about polarization and talking civilly about things you disagree with, people with whom you disagree with. But mostly it's very personal to me. I am in a bipartisan marriage. I am one of only 8% of the country, which is something I found out. And my husband and I are different in almost every single way imaginable. So I spend a lot of time thinking about polarization in my regular life, just because it's part of my reality. I'd like to share some of the tips that I use definitely for work, and I have found them to be very useful in my life as I try to talk with people around me who are different. And now I can't move my slide.
Why? You were able to move them up till now. I don't know. Ah, there we go. Now you're muted. Oh, we're all muted. Christy, we're all muted.
Okay, thank you, Christy. Sorry about that, y'all. Some technical Zoom problems. So recently I found myself listening to someone go on and on about the kneeling for the anthem, whether it was a protest or whether it was disrespectful to the flag. And I totally caught myself drowning them out in my own mind with my thoughts of how quippy my response was going to be. I was going to be so clever. And I thought of this rule, and I stopped. So if you catch yourself thinking about what you're going to say to somebody instead of listening to the words that they're saying to you before they're even done with the conversation, it's not going to allow you to absorb what they're saying. You're not going to be fully present for them. So don't refute somebody's ideas before they're done presenting them to you. Let them complete their thought. Slow down. My nature's already pretty slow. However, I think this is common, that when I feel angry, slowing down enough to think, to hear myself out, is very challenging. Especially when my moral convictions are challenged, I have to actively and intentionally ask for a break. And I do this online, and I do this more and more in person. Just asking folks to give me a minute, to let me think about my words, and to let me breathe.
Hey, you guys. Wait, let's see what's happening.
I wasn't sure if it was me, but
Um, okay, where has she gone? Let's give it a minute. Did Adriana's call drop?
she looked frozen on my screen for a minute, and then I think we lost her. Yeah.
Sorry, everyone. Let me see if I can find her.
She said her computer went all black.
Oh no,
So
that's not a
don't
great
think that's
thing.
a good.
Well, I can certainly pull up the presentation from here if someone wants to pick it up. And while I'm getting it ready, there is a couple good questions in the chat that maybe someone can ask in terms of, yeah, and I'll get the presentation. Just take me one sec.
Yeah, I was seeing some good questions come in. I'm just scrolling. Greg Wright, hi Greg, I don't know where to find you. You said, how do you start a conversation? I like that question a lot. I always, I start slowly. I start kind of trying to just check myself a little, like know where I am. Am I calm is a good place to be? Am I curious? And I usually start with a question, right? I think that that it's a pretty good approach to really start by listening, and we think about that a lot. Like, what can I learn? I mean, I know I have all kinds of things I think that are right and that should be heard, but I think that by actually asking a really genuine, curious question about an issue or a person, especially not necessarily about an issue, but like just about a person before you even get to an issue, is a good way to start. So, you know, in our methodology, we have a whole lot of things that bring people to that place of calm. But I think that thinking about that for yourself, if you're sitting near someone who you don't know what they believe or you don't know what they think, start calm and slow and gentle and curious. Let's see, I think Adriana is working her way back in. So let's give her a minute. I saw another good question. I didn't know if someone else wanted to answer that, thoughts about starting a question or starting a conversation. I don't know if Maya or Kaylee or Erica, you guys have put some thought into that practice. I don't mean to put you on the spot, however. Okay, how do you ask the tough questions without feeling insecure? Do you mean, this is from Maddie Arnold, like, do you mean, I don't know how you can answer me. I do a lot of talking to myself about reminding myself that nobody knows everything. And I do a lot of talking to myself into it being okay to be wrong, into it being okay to make mistakes, into it being okay to apologize. So like, you know, there's really tough conversations happening in our country right now around race, for example, or gender or policing. And so being kind of humble and knowing that I might not do it right and that I will pick myself up if I can't, and just returning to that humility and also like acceptance of my own imperfections helps me. Adriana,
I can share the screen now, or is she coming back?
I'm here. I can't share my screen.
Okay, I'll do it.
Thank you.
Of course. Let's see here.
Sorry that you had technical difficulties, Adriana.
Sorry, yeah, I just got a sad little apple.
Oh no. That's Can you see the screen okay? Is that
Yes, I can see the screen just fine. All right. Sorry, I hear you guys had some really great questions. What I heard there at the when I finally was able to come on sounded really awesome. So the next step is to be curious. Genuineness can get you really far in a conversation. Don't ask questions because you think you know the answer already. Don't play that gotcha game. I mean, it's annoying when people do it to you, so put yourself in somebody else's shoes. Sometimes I find myself doing this to my kid, and it clearly upsets her to the point that she stops conversation. So, you know, if kids are in tune enough to feel trapped, maybe don't try to trap people. Be sincere, base your questions on a real want to have this authentic conversation with somebody who might disagree with you about something. Next, please. Be kind. Kindness takes us so freaking far. You're never going to change somebody's mind, like Eve said before, by making them feel small or making them angry. Sometimes when I feel an easy insult bubble up in my mouth, I think of my end game. Like, what's my goal in this conversation? And my goal is that I want to talk to this person, and I want to understand them, and I want them to understand me. So resist the urge for the easy meanness. Be humble. An idea that works really well for me is the idea that I don't know anything for certain, which it's hard to be a journalist who thinks this way. I get a lot of pushback. And even when I think I do know something for certain, I try to think about somebody whose truth might be completely different than that. And they probably hold that truth to be just as true as mine. Nobody knows everything. Try to keep yourself open to the idea that nobody knows everything and that life experiences are different for everybody. It's really hard. It's a jagged pill to swallow, but I think it's super worth it. Build relationships. You can't use facts as stated and stated again and stated again to convince people of anything. It makes them dig into their moral convictions. If you guys haven't heard The Hidden Brain about moral convictions, I highly recommend it. It talks a lot about the psychology of how we dig in when people are pushing facts on us. Use your strengths. I am a storyteller, but not everyone is. Sometimes you have to hustle to get people to open up. I think it's worth that effort. If you can tell a story about your life and why you believe what you believe, more often than not, people will follow suit and explain their beliefs in the context of their life. Give people the space to do that, and you can only do that by building a relationship. Take the high road. When my daughter tells me that she's mean to somebody or she hit daddy because he was mean to her first, I will sit with her and explain to her that the only person responsible for her hands and her angry is her, and that she's got to figure out how to make her angry manifest in a way that's productive. And then I move to my job and I see people on the internet doing this, adult people, saying that they're being mean because somebody else was mean to them or because they started it. I implore you to be someone that you are proud of, to take responsibility for the things you are saying that could be abrasive to others, not to resort to name calling or attacks because it's easy. Take the high road. And last, and sometimes most difficultly of all, is to have fun. Getting to know somebody is something that enriches your life, especially if they don't agree with everything you say. It makes you think more broadly and have bigger and better ideas, I believe. And there's no reason why talking across difference should be tedious. We are all thinking human beings. You use that opportunity. That is all I have. We're happy to take your questions or your thoughts, and we want to invite you to join our Facebook group. It was up there briefly. It's Help Is This True?
You're muted, Kristen.
I'll put it back up at the end when we wrap up, so we can do a proper plug then too.
Thank you. And thank you, Celeste. Celeste put it in the chat.
Okay, I thought, Kaylee, you had a question you wanted to grab, and Maya, you did. So Kaylee, do you want to do that? Jump in. You unmute? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So this is a question from Greg. He asks, how can you determine now is not the right time for a conversation like this, or this person is not ready? I think a really important part first would be to look inward. Ask, is now the right time for me? Am I ready? Kind of going back to how is my mood? Am I feeling angry? Am I feeling, ready to kind of like jump into this a little bit too much? So I always like to kind of turn it inward first. Like if I'm asking somebody a question or a question about somebody else, it's probably means that I need to ask it of myself. And I think that then going forward from there, once you've determined you're cool, it's cool. It's a lot about kind of reading the other person, or even just asking outright. I think that asking kind of, I'm sorry, there's some noise outside if you can't,
You're fine.
That's interfering. But right, asking outright and kind of setting a foundation of, we're not here just to talk about this topic. We're here to be people, and kind of what Adriana said earlier, we're here to build a relationship, and just kind of being honest about your emotional states, I think, is a crucial foundation to that. So I usually kind of feel like asking and just perceiving what the other person is, what their body language is like. If you're in person or over the internet, I think you just kind of have to ask, are you up for this? Do you want to talk about it later?
Yeah, I see Horacio asked in the chat whether you should set boundaries for your conversation before or during the conversation, which is such a good question. I feel like, oh, maybe Horacio is just getting here.
Just got back in. We just put him back in.
So Horacio, I was just answering the question that you had put in the chat earlier about when to set boundaries. And I was thinking how much I would love to be able to set boundaries for all of these difficult conversations before they start. And I think, there's sometimes a possibility to do that. But a lot of the time, I think you might not even know what your boundaries are until you start the conversation. And you might not know that your conversation is definitely headed into difficult territory before you start it. And I think it's always valid, and it might even help the other person's guard come down a little bit to say, hey, can we just stop for a minute and talk about what are our boundaries in this conversation, or maybe what are our goals for this conversation? Yeah, that would be my advice.
I
think those two.
I'm sorry. Can I piggyback on Maya's answer?
Yeah.
Just to say that often I find that if you find yourself in a conversation where you don't know the boundaries and you've like gone into some territory that might be uncomfortable, I find that repeating what somebody said to you and asking them if this is where they want to go is a really good place to start to talk about boundaries without outright being like, hey, what are our boundaries here? Which can also it can shut down a conversation depending on who you're talking to.
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback on actually both of those two questions, and also just acknowledge that right now this is so hard because every conversation is so emotional. But I think we take it, or at least I know I take it for granted, that if someone posts something on Facebook, or if someone tells me their opinion, that they're up for a discussion. So even just at the very beginning, just saying, is this, I might disagree with you. Is this something you actually want to have a discussion about, or was that where you wanted to leave it? And I think more often than not, people are not really up for a discussion, and it takes a totally different mindset. So I think in terms of like, that's a way of setting boundaries too in the beginning of a conversation, that maybe there's not going to be a conversation. And yeah, I find that to be useful when I can remember to do it. And also to keep checking in with myself and saying like, oh, how's my body feeling in this conversation? Because I'm starting to react, have a super reactionary response to this, and just being like, it happened just today in a conversation. I said, I'm actually feeling myself getting really defensive. And so I think maybe I'm not up for this conversation right now. And I just want to take it a step back because I don't really want to be defensive about this. And it sort of let the air out of and the tension out of the conversation just to acknowledge that. So those are my tips.
Adriana, do you want to jump? You talked about somebody, or Horatio asked about how do you know who's right, which you sort of touched on a little, and it's one of the things we think about a lot. Do you want to play with that a little more?
Do I want to talk about truth being relative? Of course I want to talk about truth being relative. I try not to think of right and wrong in black and white terms. I work really hard to acknowledge that something that I hold to be completely true and right is not necessarily completely true and right for somebody else. Plus, like, it's not the point of me having a conversation with you. I'm not trying to win, because what do I win? There's no trophy for being right in a conversation. What you want to do is crack the nut of somebody else's humanity, and that just sounded really dirty, and I apologize. But you want to get to know that person. You want to have a discussion and a conversation with them. Being right or being wrong ultimately isn't going to matter, in my opinion, but I could be wrong.
Can I ask a question? So this kind of goes on a question that Miles asked earlier, and then also something that Celeste just put into the chat. So Miles was asking if these tips are reserved only for in-person contact, or we're also talking about online, and Erica answered that. And then Celeste made the comment that there's a lot of statements being made lately to some of the previous points. And my observation has been that a lot of times, or maybe it's even most of the time, when people comment on something that you've said on social media, it really is just that. It's a statement, not really getting into a discussion. So I'm curious to know if in your work you found that by saying some of the things that you've just said, sort of like, are you trying to open a conversation with me about this, or were you just wanting to just like tell me your thought and leave it at that? Like, have you done that online, and have you found that to work in a way that maybe takes something that someone was just like firing off a comment just to make that statement, you've been able to convert it into a conversation?
Adriana,
I for sure have. Oh, go ahead, Eve.
No, I was hoping you would answer.
I do this a lot, where somebody makes a statement and it's usually pretty clear that it's just a statement. But I try to get underneath it, like conversations say about abortion. Well, somebody will say it's like, well, abortion is just wrong. And we had a really successful moment recently in a group where somebody asked, well, what would you do if somebody in your life came to you and told you a situation where they were contemplating an abortion? The person completely softened from their initial statement. It's like, oh, wait, you're turning it into something that is reflective on my real life. And you're asking me how I would converse with somebody I love about this. It turned into a really nice discussion. She didn't change her mind about abortion. But it was nice to hear her talk about how she would be open to discussing this with a person in her real life, because she realizes that this person is round and a whole human being.
A question. Did you want to add, Christy or Celeste? Or I was going to go to another question. This is a complicated question from Josiah. What tips do you have for approaching political conversation with someone for whom politics and religion, and therefore politics and personal identity, are conflated? How can I get them to let down their understandably heightened guard? I I think maybe somebody else wants to jump into this, because I just feel like I was going to be repeating myself. But Adriana, did you want to grab it, or anybody else? Or I will, since I just teed it up. It's up to you guys. Okay. Said some of this, others have said it. It's like I'm always thinking long game, right? I'm thinking I'm not going to get someone to just see the world as I see it today, but I'm thinking about that I share a town with people, that I share a community with people, that I share a country, that I share a world, and that I'm part of I want to be part of the healing or the coming together, not the polarizing or alienating. And so when I'm talking to someone who's got a really different belief system, who's already primed to mistrust me or view me with suspicion, I want to be as open as possible. And there's a lot of conversations I have that aren't really conversations, that are really just listening. And one of the things I find when I'm out and about, and when I used to be out and about more pre-pandemic, is so many people just need to be heard. And that is an incredibly important, valuable offering to someone, right? So if you're, Josiah, if you have someone in your life who you just feel, you're feeling all this tension from, I would actually just start by listening, and I would start by letting them talk about the how and the why. And Adriana referenced this earlier, but we've had a lot of conversations, and to somebody's question, like, we do work a lot online, we work offline, but also online, about conversations about abortion, which are about as charged and personal as they get. But we've learned that by just giving people space to tell their story about how they come to their beliefs, about what informs them, about not and giving them space not to be attacked or judged or insulted or derided, that is a step towards good. So it's not like I'm going to walk out and talk to my Trump supporting neighbor next door and suddenly they're going to decide that Trump is something different than how they see him currently. But I will by showing up and being kind and being human. I think that's a good, important role to play. To somebody, Degrees of Truth, I like the title. Oh, somebody put a podcast in there. I saw some other questions that we haven't answered. I don't know if they want to grab it, or Christy, do you want to toss questions?
Sure, I can do that. There was a question that I saw earlier from David, and we've kind of talked about this a little bit, but I'm going to ask it in a slightly different way. So he says, how do you handle it when a friend is baiting you and then walks away? So kind of along the lines of, like, if someone just wants to drop some kind of statement on you and isn't really concerned with engaging, how do you handle that? Do you acknowledge that there's a space for conversation later? Do you just let it go? One of your tips was to take the high road. How do you take the high road for a baiting friend, and then also leave it open to, like, maybe at some point have a conversation?
And asking them if they're baiting you is sometimes helpful. Like, hey, are you baiting me? Are you ready to talk about this? Especially if you're, IRL friends, that works really well. If something that is really annoying to me is when somebody baits you, you ask them that question, and then they just try to bait you again. At that point, I usually say, it's like, oh, okay, it's clear to me. Thank you, Christy. It's clear to me that you're not ready to talk about this. I would love to talk about it more when you are ready. So kind of just setting it so that, like, I see what you're doing. I'm not going to fall for it. And I want to talk to you about it for real when you're ready.
Is it possible to have relationships where you don't talk about any important stuff?
I'm sorry, you broke up for me. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. I said, is it possible to have relationships where you don't talk about any important stuff?
My mother-in-law.
Lots of people have made that decision, right? To not talk about it. And piece missing, right? But I think, wait, somebody just put in the chat. Oh, somebody said her brothers, Allison, right? Yeah, I don't know if anyone wants, I have this strange family where I tend to be aligned with most people in it, but I know a lot of people have close family members where they have kind of uh, zones of non-communication. And look, one of the things we do in our work is we frame every conversation with a question, right? Are you interested and open to a respectful conversation about issue X, right? So, and some people, it's always interesting. Some people are like, yeah, I am. And then like, after we get to know them, we talk to them, they're like, actually, I'm not. I don't want to talk to people who support this policy or have this view or who like, and that's okay, right? Like we're human, and it does take strength, a certain kind of strength and a certain kind of openness to engage in these conversations. And we don't have to do it all the time. I mean, we do because it's our work, but we don't have to do it all the time in every setting. And in fact, we know it's counterproductive if we're in a bad spot around it. So yeah, and I wanted to add something about humor, which I think it hits on our point number 8, which is have fun. It's like, and this is built into how we do our work. We come together to talk about something difficult like immigration or guns or race, but we purposely populate our conversations with lighter fare, right? Because you can't talk about gun control policy 24/7 as if, you know, that's a hard and difficult and stress inducing topic for most of us, and it's much easier to talk about the harder stuff when you have other things to turn to, when you can talk also about family and friends and life and movies and gardening and all the other stuff we care about. And so in kind of thinking about your question, Chrissy, like, can you have relationships where you don't talk about things? I would focus on the relationships first, like with family members where it's difficult. Like, what do you share? Where are you aligned? Where can you come together? Because all of that is the fabric of life. And then maybe not ever, but maybe sometimes raise the things that you care about politically, perhaps, but in a really heartful way and sincere way. Like. We got a question, actually, Christy she sent it to us from someone before the chat about, and it was, and I can't summarize it. Maybe you have it, Christy, you could pull it up. But yeah, but it was basically about, it was someone wanted to make a point to another person, like, and it was along the lines of, can't they just see that X, Y, Z leads to Z and therefore X, right? And we have that feeling, right? We have this idea that if they can't, they just see, but that's just not gonna get us where we want to be. And so think about what you have capacity for, think about who you might resonate with, and truly, truly, truly think about what you might learn by just listening. And what we see again and again is with people work with us is people begin to see a couple of things that I think are really important. One, they begin to see that their own behavior isn't necessarily impeccable, right? Like we tend to see the negative behavior of people with whom we disagree in much greater relief, right? So we see the name calling, we see the ugliness, we see the divisiveness when it's someone on the other side. We don't see it in our own communities, right? Like we see how, depending on who we support or what policy we support, we just see it really differently. And so one of the most fascinating things about moderating conversations like this for so long is people are always coming in and they'll be like, well, this side said this, and and this side said this, and they just don't, we are blind to our own negative behaviors. I don't want to say blind, we have very bad vision for our own negative behaviors, right? Like, a really easy example is if you call the president a dumpster fire, that's a name call, right? It might not feel like a name call if you live in the accepted norm, but if you're someone for whom that isn't, then that is just hits you as a name call. And so I think it's important to think about this, and it's a very fascinating thing to watch it happen over and over again. We feel like we're entitled to be negative or to be dismissive or to be reactionary because we're right often. Adriana mentioned her daughter, saying she did X because her dad did Y. Well, we tend to be like, well, and you see this from grown people all the time, like, and I see it in my own head and I try to resist it. Like, well, they said this, so I get to do this. Well, Yeah, and so we really, that's just something to be mindful of and to think about. I don't know where we want to anchor ourselves now that I've gone wandering.
No, that was really good.
Oh,
Go ahead, Kaylee.
Dan had a question about how useful and productive the mute, block, unfriend functions are on social. Is it avoidance or soul saving? And I think so. In groups where I'm working as a moderator, oftentimes we use these functions where we kick people out of groups, we mute them, where they're just trying to be antagonistic or bad actors. So for the kind of conversations that Spaceship Media is doing, I find them very useful. However, in my personal life, I resist the urge to unfriend people almost every day. Because if I'm not seeing what they're saying, it's still out there. Other people are still seeing it. And I'm depriving myself of knowledge just because my skin is too thin. Like that's how I think of it. So.
And I go back and forth on this. Like I spend a lot of time looking at all kinds of viewpoints, and then sometimes I have to take a break. I do it because I'm interested in how talking points filter through conversation. They filter through the news ecosystem and surface, and I'm interested in what the sort of the current point counterpoint is. But it also can be very painful, right? When you see some of the difficult stuff. Kaylee, did you have a question you wanted to ask?
Yeah, I wanted to say or bring up that Elizabeth had a couple good questions in the chat that seem sort of related, so I figured we can talk about them together. So her first question is, how do you get the other person to stop and listen? And then her second question is, these days, how can you foster a discussion without a cell phone interfering? So those are two definitely different questions, but also you can see how they relate. I mean, I'm going to ask you guys all for input as well on this, but I think it's an interesting question because, asking somebody or seeing how you can get somebody to do something, I mean, that's hard. You can't really force anyone to do anything. So I think I always go back to, it's really about like setting the foundation, kind of talking about the things that we've mentioned earlier here, where we talk about like, you just ask blatantly, like, are you ready for a conversation about this? Do you want to talk about this now? Do you really want to talk about this? You don't have to say it as accusatory as I just did. And then another one, maybe for like the cell phone thing, I think depending on who you're talking to, like I know that I have friends who are just always on their phones. So, and like even my mom, sometimes I'll be like, Mom, look at me, I'm talking to you. And it's a fun role reversal there. But sometimes I just go into it thinking, okay, this is going to be a short conversation. And I just kind of mentally prepare for that, even though I may want it to be a longer, like deeper discussion. I have to acknowledge that not everybody is always available for that. And then sometimes that changes. Sometimes a longer or a short conversation can turn really long. Sometimes the other way around. So that's kind of what I have so far. But if anybody else, any of the other moderators want to jump in and suggestions, Erica, go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking about this, trying to check my own motivation. So if I'm in a conversation, and I was just thinking about what you said, Elizabeth, about one-upsmanship and your brother-in-law at family gatherings. And I have a brother, he and I really disagree on a lot of things, and he's into like some pretty conspiracy theory type stuff. And I realized that I approach every conversation with him as if I can just convince him, I will then sort of save the world. Like those are the stakes that are involved in every one of our conversations. And I think he feels the same way about me, that like, if he can convert me, then like I will be safer. And, and maybe in his mind that's true. But I think for me, and especially in these conversations with, the sort of one-upsmanship, it's like, I have to check myself and say, like, what do I think is really at stake here? And is it incredibly necessary for me to change this person's mind? If they don't want to have a discussion, then that's fine. But also then flipping that and saying like, I wonder what it is in this person's life and why they believe what they believe. And sometimes that's more important than actually changing their mind, but understanding why. I have an aunt who's incredibly anti-abortion and posts lots of things. And I realized that I don't know why that happened in her life. I don't know if she's had to have an abortion. I don't know if she wanted and she couldn't. And, so I don't know what that isn't. And to me, if I'm able to step back, that actually feels more important than I want her to be, at least pro-choice. So yeah, that I think it's hard to get away from this idea of like, right. But how do we change their minds? Like what's in it for us if they do change their minds?
Another thing that one of the things that people always ask us is like, and this just is really saying what Erica's just said in a different way. People are always like, did people change their mind? And that's their measure of success. Like how many people's minds change? And for us, we work at a different point, and I think you can see this by the chorus of voices in this room. Our point is, let's get to the point where we honor the humanity of people who, in this case, who we share a country with, or a world with, or a community, whatever it is. Let's get to that point where we understand that that a starting point is our respect for them. A starting point is our connection to them. A starting point is being able to hold their lives dear like we hold our own. And that is very different than sort of forcing a viewpoint on someone or compelling a belief on someone. It is not, however, it's the long path to that, right? I mean, it retains, for me anyway, a hope that I will see another person's world more clearly and that they will see my world more clearly. But it isn't an immediate thing. And I think of it a little bit I think of this work as having to do with, like, I think about how I approach my parenting, and Adriana brought this up too. It's like the long game is a human being who can move through the world successfully, right? The short game isn't whether I win where the shoes go now, or whether the teeth get brushed now, or any of that. The long game is, does this person have a system of being able to relate to me? And so I think long game a lot. And it's hard when everything feels so urgent and so crunched and so chaotic. And I guess I would urge people to kind of breathe into that a little bit. And I know this, but like, we have had hard moments in history. We get through them. We have a lot of agency in them. And there's a lot of terrific and enduring things about our country. And we all come with an incredible skill set. I want to say that one of the things that we do find, and I mentioned that some people opt out right along the way, but most people really want to talk to each other. And most people feel better when we can. And so we kind of hold those things in mind as we do this work. I see a question from Allison. Let's see.
Yeah, I was just going to address that question from Allison. If that's cool. I want to make sure that I'm understanding it right. Is there a way to bring up examples of somebody you know very well, of their actions in the past that contradict their ideals? I would give a lot of thought and have a lot of pause about doing that to somebody who you care about and love, I'm presuming, since they're family, and ask yourself the question again of what is the end game? Pointing out something that they might see as a huge mistake, and that's how they landed at their belief now, isn't going to solve anything for you. If anything, it's going to make them likely resentful to you. So holding their truth dear and trying to figure out why, if they did X in the past, they're doing that now, is way more important than pointing out you did X then, and now you're saying this. So the why and the person is so much more important than showing them that they've been hypocrites in the past. There was also a question that was farther up that I wanted to talk about. What about social media conversations that appear to be 24/7 on the topic? Don't forget that you are in control of how long you hold your phone in your hand and how long you're sitting at your computer.
No, you're not.
You can walk away from a conversation, especially online. It's going to be there. When you get back, it might have gone on and on and on. But again, like, what is your end game? What is the goal? Your goal is to learn and to try to reach other humans on a human level, I would assume. So walk away. The world isn't going to end or stop because you didn't get to make your point at comment number 35.
I'm going to ask one more question and ask you, because we're just about at time, and I want to give a little bit, I want to allow you all to explain kind of in your own words what the benefit of the Facebook group that we've started is and how the moderation can help foster this conversation. So what kind of why you do this the way you do this. And I don't know if there's a way to also work in, so earlier Sharon had a question that said, how can journalists / media outlets talk to each other along these lines? But given that most of you have journalism backgrounds, if not all of you, Spaceship crew, I don't know. And I think that your reaction, like you said at the top of the call, Eve, was your reaction to like your experience in journalism kind of led you to this place. So if there's a way to sort of talk about that too, but I do want to give everyone on the call a chance to sort of better understand what our goals are for the Facebook group that we have started. And also for anyone on the call who is not part of the group, again, Celeste put the link in the chat. Maybe she could drop it in again so it's a little bit farther up. And we're still welcoming people to join us there. So if you're interested to continue this conversation on Facebook with all of the people on this call, we would love to have you. So I will let you answer that question now.
Thank you, Christy. Do you want to talk a little bit about the group, Erica, or do you want me to? I'm happy to.
Yeah, would you actually?
Yeah.
And then I'll chime in.
Okay, so this Help Is This True was dreamed up by Spaceship and the News Collab, and Christy, maybe you'd chime in too, with this idea of how can we continue the good work that they're doing in the media active course. How can we work together to look at mis and disinformation and like sort of crowdsource the problem solving around that, but also how can we think about how can we support a community and thinking about all the things that we think about, like how to engage across difference, how to raise difficult issues, timing of that, some of the psychology and sociology around how to go about having productive conversations. So I hope you will join us in the group. I think it's a nice place. We're beginning to see robust conversation and get to know people. And it really is your community, right? So you can post into it, you can ask questions, you can share studies, and our idea is there to just bring people together around some of these really thorny, difficult, and sometimes isolating issues. I think it is isolating sometimes to not be partisan in this moment, right? To think about bridging, to think about the shared humanity, to think about the shared fate versus sitting in a camp and staying there. And so that's what we're working to build community around. And I hope we'll get to see you guys all there.
Yeah, and the group is sort of a combination of we want to give you more tools, similar things that you learned in Media Active, and give you a chance to practice them, but also engage with one another, ask these sort of genuine questions. So combining sort of sleuthing tools and then more conversations around how do you have difficult conversations and where do those, how do we find the trolls, and then how do we also know that facts don't always change minds, and how do we keep these conversations going. So we'd love for all of you to join if you haven't already. I put a link in the chat for the survey, and then I'll send you an invitation. And if you haven't taken the Media Active course, you can still enroll, I believe. It's more of a self-guided course that way. But once you're enrolled in Media Active, you can also join Help Is This True, the Facebook group.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. And I love that you said it great. We want to continue to give tools, have conversation, also to help you talk to folks who haven't taken this class or who aren't in this group. And so you can bring these tools to your friends and family, which is, pretty much been the point of this whole conversation. So, and Alice and I agree, we would really love to do this on a platform that everyone can access. It's at this current moment in time, Facebook is the place where most people are, and it's the easiest way for us to build this community. So I hate to have to exclude anyone, but we do have a discussion board in Media Active, and we are still actively looking at that. So we welcome you to share there, and you know, hope there's other ways we can keep in touch too. And when we build the perfect open platform, then we will definitely continue this conversation there, because I know it's a goal of all of ours. So again, so sorry we went over a couple minutes, but I just want to say thank you again to everyone for being here. Thanks to the Spaceship team for such great insights and answering so many great questions. Thanks to all of you for asking those great questions. And we really sincerely look forward to continuing this conversation, you know, out there on the internet. So thank you again very much, and hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.